Story 1: The Ice Machine. I travel alone more than I'd like to.
I work for a medical equipment company, so every few weeks I end up in a different city for inspections or training sessions.
Most of my trips are uneventful.
I check in, order dinner, answer emails, sleep, and leave before sunrise. Hotels have always felt safe to me.
There are cameras. Front desks that stay open all night. People coming and going. It never occurred to me that someone could make a hotel feel just as isolating as an empty house.
That changed 2 years ago.
I checked into a hotel just outside Nashville after a 6-hour drive.
It wasn't fancy, but it wasn't cheap either.
5 floors. Indoor hallways. Bright lobby. A small bar next to the elevators. Everything looked perfectly normal. The receptionist smiled while handing me my keycard. "You're in room 528.
She pointed toward the elevators.
"I put you near the ice machine.
Hopefully the noise won't bother you."
I laughed. "I doubt I'll even notice it."
I wish I hadn't said that. The hallway smelled faintly of fresh carpet cleaner.
Room 528 was only a few doors from the ice machine. It sat inside a little alcove with a soda vending machine beside it. I unpacked. Called my wife. Watched half of a baseball game. Nothing unusual.
Around 10:30 I decided to get some ice for a bottle of water.
As I walked toward the machine, I noticed a man standing beside it. He wasn't using it. He wasn't drinking anything. He just stood there, looking down the hallway.
When he noticed me, he smiled.
"Evening." "Hey." I filled my bucket. Walked back to my room. That was it.
Or so I thought.
At exactly 1:12 in the morning,
the ice machine started. It made the loud grinding noise they all make.
Then, silence. No footsteps. No door opening. No voices. Just the machine.
I figured someone grabbed ice quietly.
Went back to sleep. The next night, the same thing happened. 1:12. The machine. Grinding. Dumping ice. Then, nothing. Again. No footsteps. No bucket. No elevator. Nothing. It seemed odd. But not frightening. Just odd. The following morning I mentioned it while grabbing coffee downstairs.
The woman working the breakfast area laughed.
"That machine has been acting up all week." "There wasn't anyone using it?"
She shrugged.
"Maybe." I accepted the explanation. Machines malfunction. Simple. That evening I got back later than expected. Around 11. The hallway was empty. Except the same man. Standing beside the ice machine. Again.
This time, he wasn't smiling. He was staring toward my end of the hallway.
When I stepped off the elevator, he immediately looked away.
Then slowly walked toward the stairwell.
Something about it bothered me. Not enough to report. Just enough to notice. Story 2: The Wrong Room.
I've stayed in enough hotels that I stopped paying attention to room numbers.
After a while, they're all the same. 4th floor. 6th floor. Near the elevator. Far from the elevator.
As long as the bed was clean and the Wi-Fi worked, I didn't really care. But there was one hotel where I wish I'd paid a lot more attention to the room next to mine.
This happened in the fall of 2022.
I was driving through Missouri for work and needed a place to stay before continuing my trip the next morning. It was already after 9:30 p.m. when I found a mid-range hotel just off the interstate.
The lobby was warm, quiet, and almost empty. A football game was playing on the TV behind the front desk.
The receptionist looked exhausted.
She handed me my keycard. Room 614.
Then she smiled. If anyone bothers you tonight, just call downstairs.
It sounded like one of those things employees say automatically. I laughed. I'll keep that in mind. She didn't laugh back.
The sixth floor had that familiar hotel smell.
Clean sheets mixed with old carpet. I found room 614 near the end of the hallway. Across from it was an emergency exit. Next door. Room 615.
Nothing looked unusual.
I unpacked, took a shower, ordered food, and called my girlfriend before going to bed. The walls were surprisingly thin. I could hear the television from 615. Some old action movie. Every now and then someone laughed. Probably 2 or 3 people. It actually made the floor feel less lonely. Around midnight the TV next door shut off. Everything became completely quiet. I fell asleep almost immediately. A loud knock woke me sometime later. 3 quick knocks. I looked at my phone. 2:18 a.m. Another knock. This time louder. Then a man's voice. Open up. I sat up. He wasn't talking to me. The voice came from next door. Room 615. Whoever was inside didn't answer. The man knocked again. Harder this time. Come on. I know you're in there. Silence. After about 30 seconds, I heard footsteps walking away. I went back to sleep. The next morning I left early for meetings. When I returned around 6 p.m., I noticed something odd. Room 615's door was slightly open. Not wide. Maybe an inch. Housekeeping carts were gone for the day. No one was inside that I could see. I stood there for a second.
Then the door slowly closed by itself. I figured someone had pulled it shut from inside.
No big deal. That evening I grabbed dinner downstairs. When I got back, I passed a woman carrying towels. She asked, "Are you staying in 614? Yeah.
She smiled politely. If anyone knocks tonight, don't answer unless you know who it is.
Before I could ask why,
she pushed her cart into the elevator.
I tried convincing myself she'd probably been talking about scammers. Or drunk guests. Hotels get all kinds of people. Still, I locked every lock before going to bed. At exactly 1:43 a.m., someone knocked again. 3 slow knocks. This time, on my door. I stayed quiet. Another knock. Then, front desk. I walked over. Yeah?
We need to verify your ID.
Something felt off. I can bring it downstairs. Silence. Then, no, sir. Just open the door.
The voice sounded calm.
Too calm.
I picked up the room phone and called the front desk. The woman answered immediately.
I whispered. Someone says they're from the front desk. There was a pause. Then she said quietly, "Do not open your door." My stomach tightened. We didn't send anyone. I looked through the peephole. No one. The hallway was empty. I actually thought whoever it was had left. Then I remembered something. Hotel peepholes don't show the area directly against the wall beside the door. Someone could be standing there. Completely invisible. I stepped backward. My heart was pounding. A few seconds later, the handle moved. Very gently. Just once. Then again. Someone was testing it. The deadbolt held. The front desk employee stayed on the phone. Security is coming. I kept watching the door. Nothing. Then, a soft knock. Almost polite. "I know you're awake." I didn't answer. "You looked through the peephole." Every hair on my arms stood up. How did he know? Then I realized. He'd probably seen the light change through it.
A minute later, security arrived.
The hallway was empty. Again.
They searched the floor.
Nothing. No one. One guard asked. Could it have been another guest? Maybe. Except, when they reviewed the cameras, No1 had walked toward my room. No1 had walked away.
I barely slept.
The next morning I packed my things before heading to work. As I left my room, room 615's door was open. Completely open. Inside, no furniture. No bed. Nothing.
The room was under renovation.
Empty. It had been empty the entire time. I stopped walking. I looked back inside. The TV I'd heard. The laughter. The knocking. How? I went downstairs immediately.
The manager checked the records. Room 615 hadn't been rented in over a month. Workers were replacing the flooring.
No guests. No television. Nothing. I told him everything. He didn't say much. Just asked me to wait. About an hour later, 2 police officers arrived. They wanted to look at something. One officer took me to the 6th floor. Instead of entering 615,
he opened a maintenance door farther down the hallway. Inside was a narrow service corridor. It ran behind several guest rooms.
Electrical wiring. Water pipes. Storage shelves. Then he pointed.
There was a small opening behind the wall separating my room from 615.
Big enough for someone to crawl through.
The renovation had exposed the space.
Someone had been living inside the service corridor. Sleeping there. Moving around after dark. Listening through the walls.
Police searched the building.
They eventually found bedding. Food wrappers. Bottled water. Flashlights. A backpack. The man was gone. He'd escaped through another maintenance exit before officers arrived the night before.
A detective later explained what they believed happened.
The man would wait inside the service hallway during the day.
At night he'd come out through unfinished rooms.
He'd knock on occupied doors pretending to be hotel staff. If someone opened the door,
he'd force his way inside.
If they didn't, he'd move on.
No one knows how many hotels he'd done this in.
3 weeks later I got a call from the detective.
They'd arrested him in another state.
He'd been hiding inside hotels for almost 6 months. Mostly targeting business travelers staying alone. People who wouldn't be missed until checkout. I asked one question that had been bothering me. What about the TV?
The detective smiled slightly.
He carried a small Bluetooth speaker. What? He'd play recordings of television shows and conversations from empty rooms. Why? So people would think someone was staying next door. That answer bothered me more than anything else. Because it worked. I never questioned the noises. They made me feel safer. Like I wasn't alone on the floor. Now whenever I stay in a hotel, I pay attention. If I hear a television through the wall, I notice whether anyone ever opens that door.
Whether housekeeping goes inside.
Whether I hear people actually leaving the room. Maybe that's paranoid. Maybe. But every once in a while, I'll walk down a quiet hotel hallway late at night. See an empty room with its door cracked open. And remember that sometimes, the room you should worry about isn't the one that's occupied. It's the one that isn't. Story 3, the Do Not Disturb sign. I never thought a piece of cardboard hanging from a hotel door could save my life. Before this happened, I didn't even use the Do Not Disturb sign. If housekeeping came in while I was out, I didn't care. Fresh towels were nice. A made bed was nice. It was just another part of staying in a hotel. Now, I never leave my room without hanging one on the door. And if it disappears, I leave immediately. This happened last summer. I had flown to Denver for a 3-day training seminar hosted by my company. Instead of booking one of the expensive downtown hotels, my manager found a newer business hotel about 15 minutes away. It looked nice. Glass lobby. Electronic keycards. Security cameras everywhere. The kind of place that makes you think nothing bad could happen there. I checked in around 5 in the afternoon. The receptionist was friendly. Room 824. She handed me 2 keycards. If you need anything, we're here all night. I thanked her and headed upstairs. The 8th floor was almost empty. There were only a handful of cars in the parking lot when I'd arrived. I figured the hotel just wasn't busy that week. My room overlooked the interstate. Nothing special. I unpacked. Answered some emails. Ordered dinner. Watched television until around 11. It was one of the quietest hotels I'd ever stayed in. The next morning I left around 7 for the seminar. When I came back that evening, my room had been cleaned. Bed made. Fresh towels. Normal. But something caught my attention. The Do Not Disturb sign was hanging on the inside handle of my room. I knew I hadn't used it. I figured housekeeping must have left it there by mistake. I tossed it onto the desk. The second morning, without really thinking about it, I hung the sign outside before leaving. Mostly because I didn't need my room cleaned again. I was only staying one more night. When I came back around 6, the sign was gone. Not inside the room. Not on the floor. Just gone. Housekeeping hadn't entered. The bed was exactly how I'd left it. The towels hadn't been replaced. I figured maybe another guest had taken it as a joke. People do weird things. I went downstairs and asked for another one. The receptionist apologized. They disappear sometimes. She handed me a new sign. That answer seemed odd. But I didn't think much about it. That night I called my wife before bed. She laughed when I mentioned it. So someone stole your Do Not Disturb sign? Apparently. Maybe they really needed one. We both laughed. Looking back, I wish I'd paid more attention. The next morning, I hung the new sign outside before leaving. This time, I took a picture of it. I don't know why. Maybe because it annoyed me. Maybe because something felt off. The seminar ended early. I returned to the hotel around 3 in the afternoon. The sign was gone. Again. Housekeeping hadn't been inside. Nothing had changed. Except the curtains. I always closed them completely before leaving. Now they were open about 6 inches. Enough for someone to look into the room from outside. I walked over and closed them. Then I noticed fingerprints on the glass. From the inside. I hadn't touched that window. I told myself I was overthinking everything. Maybe housekeeping had opened the curtains. Maybe I forgot. Travel makes you tired. You stop remembering little details. That evening I went downstairs for dinner. When I came back, the older man from room 826 was standing near the elevators. He nodded at me. You traveling alone? It caught me off guard. Yeah. He looked toward my room. Be careful. I smiled awkwardly. Why? I've stayed here for 4 nights. So? My Do Not Disturb sign disappeared too. Before I could ask another question, the elevator arrived. He stepped inside. The doors closed. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 1 a.m.,
I heard footsteps outside.
slow, unhurried. They stopped outside my door. Silence. Then,
A very soft scratching sound.
like someone touching the cardboard slot where the Do Not Disturb sign usually hung. The sound lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then the footsteps walked away. The next morning I skipped breakfast and went straight to the front desk. I asked if they kept extra security footage.
The manager looked confused.
Why? I explained everything. The missing signs. The footsteps. The man in room 826. He frowned. Give me a minute. He disappeared into the back office. About 15 minutes later he returned.
His expression had completely changed.
He asked me to stay where I was.
Then he quietly called the police.
Apparently, I wasn't the first guest to complain. Not even close. An officer arrived and asked if I'd be willing to look at security footage.
The camera covering my hallway showed something strange.
Every afternoon, about an hour after I left,
A man wearing a gray hoodie would get off the elevator.
he never approached any room directly. Instead, he slowly walked the hallway, looking at every door, every Do Not Disturb sign. Then he'd stop outside mine, remove the sign, look underneath it, wait a few seconds, then walk away. He never tried my door, never knocked, never entered. Just removed the sign. Every single day. I asked why.
The detective answered. We think he was marking occupied rooms.
What do you mean?
He wanted to know which rooms belonged to people staying multiple nights.
I still didn't understand.
Then he continued.
If the sign came back the next morning, he knew the guest was still there. If it didn't, they'd checked out. My stomach dropped. So he was watching routines. Police searched the footage from previous weeks.
They discovered the same man had visited the hotel at least 8 times.
Always doing the same thing. Removing signs. Watching hallways. Learning who traveled alone. That night, even though officers believed he knew police had been called, they asked me to stay one more night while they watched the building. I agreed.
Mostly because I assumed nothing would happen.
I was wrong. At exactly 12:47 a.m., someone knocked. Once.
Very softly.
I stayed silent. Another knock. Then, housekeeping. My heart started racing. Housekeeping? At midnight? Then, silence. I looked through the peephole. Nobody.
I almost convinced myself whoever it was had left.
Then I noticed a shoe, barely visible, pressed against the wall beside my door. Whoever it was knew exactly where to stand to avoid the peephole. I backed away. Called the detective. Before he answered, the handle moved. Slowly. Then stopped. Then, a whisper. I know you're in there. I didn't respond. The whisper came again. I just need to ask you something. The detective answered. I whispered what was happening. He said only one sentence. Do not open that door. Less than 2 minutes later, I heard people running down the hallway. The footsteps outside my room disappeared. Then shouting. A struggle. And finally, handcuffs. Police arrested the man at the emergency stairwell. Inside his backpack they found several stolen hotel key sleeves, maps of different hotels, dozens of Do Not Disturb signs, a notebook. The notebook was the part that stayed with me.
Every page listed room numbers, dates, times lights turned off, whether guests were alone, whether they answered knocks, whether they ordered food delivery, whether they left early. He wasn't choosing victims randomly. He was studying them. 4 days. The detective later told me they believed he had been responsible for multiple hotel burglaries across 3 states. He preferred business hotels. People traveling alone. Guests nobody expected home until the end of the week. I still travel for work. Probably 50 nights a year. I still use the Do Not Disturb sign. But every morning before I leave, I take a picture of it hanging on my door. When I come back, I check if it's still there. Most people probably think that's a strange habit. Maybe it is. But if I ever come back to another hotel, and that sign is gone, I'm not asking the front desk for a replacement. I'm grabbing my bags, checking out, and finding somewhere else to sleep. Because sometimes, the smallest thing missing from your hotel room is the first sign that someone has been paying far too much attention to you. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.